What's happening, everyone? Welcome to another edition of In the Studio with Spicy G. Today, my guest artist comes from Los Angeles, California, and he's one of the finest alto saxophone players in the world. His name is Alex Hahn, and we are super excited to share this video with you. This is going to be a little bit of a different video, as this one's going to be a little bit more orchestral in nature, rather than some of the more pop-oriented tracks we've been dealing with. Let's do it. Alright, welcome everyone. Looking forward to today's session, as it's a little bit different than some of the other sessions that I'm usually doing, where I'm usually either working with a vocal artist or a songwriter. In this case, with an instrumentalist, I have to do a lot more prep work prior to them coming in, because we're not really going to be writing a song together. What he's going to be doing, Alex is going to be doing, is going to be laying down the melody of the song and then taking a solo on it. And we chose this George Michael song. It's kind of an old one off of one of his first albums called Kissing a Fool. I used to do this song when I was on tour with Michael Bublé, and I always loved the song, and I mentioned it to Alex, and he thought it was a great idea, so I decided to do an arrangement on it. This particular song has a lot of jazz harmony in it, which is kind of really cool for Alex because it's a little bit more harmonically involved and a little bit more fun to play over if you're a horn player. So what I'm doing right now is I'm kind of playing through the parts. Initially, when you first started the video, you saw that I was just playing through the parts just with a kind of a keyboard patch, or a string patch. And what I was doing was just kind of going through and seeing what I could do for an intro. And of course, I wanted to use part of the melody for the intro. And what I did after I laid it down there, you can see it says strings Miro full, which is Miroslav, because that's the string patch that I like to use usually when I'm starting strings. I recorded just kind of the full orchestra, and what I'm doing now is I'm taking each one of those strings and putting them on a separate track. So right now I did violin 1, and now I'm recording violin 2, as you can see here. And you see that there's already 4 tracks of strings. And the reason that is because after I record one, I move it down to a different string patch. So right now what I'm doing most of the time is I'm laying a string line down on Miroslav, or in this case I'm doing it on east-west strings first, and then I just drag it down to the Miroslav sounds. In order to make these string sections sound nice and big and full, I like to mix and match the different string libraries to really kind of make a sound of different instruments, different string players, rather than just having one unified string player. So if you're keeping a score right now, I have violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, and I just recorded the bass. And I have all those instruments as well, with the exception of the bass, in the Miroslav sounds. And then I'm still going to be keeping the Miroslav full string patches. Now that I have an intro, you can see I started kind of putting in some decorative figures. Over here I just put in a glockenspiel just for a little hit at the end of the phrase right before the melody comes in. Now that I have the string parts, I'm going to start adding some woodwinds, because I hear some woodwinds in my head on this. So I have on my template over here flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon, and French horn. And I just laid down a quick bassoon part, because that's the first one that I heard, and I'm going to keep adding on that. And what I'm thinking about while I'm writing all this stuff in my head is just little melodies that I think work really nice within what I wrote for the strings. Because the string parts kind of came across to me first with the melody, now I'm just going to be decorating that stuff with the woodwinds and creating a little bit more movement in the woodwinds to kind of build slightly into the release, so that for when Alex comes in. Just a quick note to all of you aspiring orchestrators and arrangers. I have a really good command of these particular instruments, so I know the ranges of most instruments, and I know them very well, and I know the timbres of those instruments and where the instruments sound good, how to make things stand out in which particular instrument and which register. So these are all things that kind of make a good orchestrator, knowing where to put specific lines, how to make them blend, how to make them stand out, what registers are stressful, what registers are very dark in nature. these are all things that are going through my mind as I'm writing these lines. I may write a line in a flute line and then feel that, oh, that should go to the clarinet, or vice versa. Or I may just write a melody that I don't feel is strong enough. So right now I just redid the flute melody that I had originally put in because I just didn't think it was a strong enough melody. So before starting the project, I already knew roughly what the instrumentation was going to be. I knew I was going to have piano, bass, drums, possibly guitar, and I knew I was going to go for some sort of orchestral sound, just to kind of, I think that blends really nice with Alex's horn. He's an alto saxophone player, so it's a little bit brighter than the tenor, and I thought this would be a real good combination. And right now you can see I just laid down the chords first in the piano, and then I did a little melody line on top of it that I just heard after the fact. Here I'm going to be adding the drums, and I'm using one of my favorite drum plugins, which is the Addictive Drums 2. They just have really great sounding drums. And I bought an expansion pack for this, which is I think it's called Modern Jazz Brushes. So I'm going to be looking inside Addictive Drums. They have a bunch of different jazz grooves and things like that. And so I'm just going to drag one over there and kind of mix and match them all so that it sounds real. If I don't mix and match them, it's going to just sound like, a copy and paste. That works in pop music, but it's not going to work in this style of music. So I'm going to go ahead and make it a little more real sounding. This type of music, just in general, takes a lot longer than pop production. Mostly because things change all the time in orchestral music, whereas, in pop music, you're doing a lot of copying and pasting. Also, just another quick note, you probably hear that little synth quarter note thing. I like to do a lot of mixing and matching with orchestral sounds and synth sounds, so I wanted to use something kind of synthy but lighter at the verse here. So you hear that. I think it's an Omnisphere patch that I used. Again, for those of you who've seen some of my other videos, you know that I love Omnisphere, so it was probably one of those. And right now I'm just chopping up these different brush patterns that I liked. Some of them have little fills in them. Some of them have just a different sound. And I kind of mix and match them to make it sound like something like a drummer would play. I can't stress enough how important it is to make it sound live and real. That's what this style of music is about, and it's important to grab that. Right now I'm using Trillion to lay down the bass. They have by far the best sampled upright bass sound. And I use, as you've seen in some of my other videos, I use Trillion for everything, but especially the upright jazz bass sound. It's just top notch. You've probably also noticed that I bounce around a lot. I don't just do all the strings and then all the pianos and all the bass. I bounce around to whatever I hear because I want to keep the juices flowing as much as I can. So right now I went back to the piano and I'm just laying down some chords. I know that Alex is pretty much going to play that verse. At least in my head I had Alex playing the verse by himself with just those little synth sounds and maybe some drums. And then verse 2 I was going to add additional instruments. So here you can see that I'm adding a string, just a real soft string line. This is definitely typical of this type of a song where the first time you hear the first A section, it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot happening, and then you start to add as the piece grows. Very similar to some of the pop production where every time the track is building and building and building. Now I'm bouncing back to the woodwind section, and I'm laying down some clarinet. Both the flute and clarinet I know Alex plays, and he'll record that. He's done lots of recordings for me in the past, so I know he's going to bring in his flute and clarinet to lay down some live flute and clarinet. It does make a difference. As much as I love sample sounds, and I'm a big fan of doing as much as you can, there's nothing like the live instruments, and in this music in particular, it just takes it to the next level. You kind of need it. Most of the time when I'm doing this type of music, I'm writing a score out. In some of the other videos you may have seen that I write the score out and then I conduct an orchestra, like a real live orchestra. The reason I'm doing it like this is because I can do it all myself, and it's much cheaper than a regular orchestra. A big orchestra, let's say 20-piece orchestra, for one song could be quite expensive. You're probably talking about, maybe 10 grand. So in this particular instance, I can do all of it myself, and I can get a couple of live woodwinds because Alex is going to record that, and it's going to still sound really good. A lot of these productions, when I'm doing them inside the DAW, I tend to put a lot of groove-oriented stuff underneath. So right now what I'm doing is kind of putting almost like a hip-hop-y type groove underneath some of this jazz stuff. And it just kind of adds a different dimension. You know, I like to always do things that aren't expected, so I'm adding this groove. I think it's kind of a fun little groove and kind of makes it groove a little more to me. You'll notice that I found a kick pattern that I like, and I separated the cross stick out from the kick pattern, mostly because I wanted to add some reverb, kind of big reverb, to the cross stick. And the kick, I don't need nearly as much reverb on, so that's why I separated the two out. You can also see that I had added some congas, just a conga pattern that I found that I just chopped up a little bit, just again to add a little bit of motion. So now I got a hip-hop groove with some sort of a conga sound, and now I'm even adding like a swing feel. So I'm kind of combining all these different elements at this bridge right here, because the song kind of really does take a lift at this bridge. So I thought it'd be kind of an interesting idea to combine the hip-hop, that conga Latin-y flavor, and then the swing feel kind of all in one, and see what kind of groove I can come up with. So as I mentioned before, I spend a lot of time prepping prior to the artist coming in this style of music, because you kind of have to. And this definitely takes twice as long, at least, as the pop stuff. Now I hear some strings happening on that bridge, just some kind of padded strings. Padded means held. And then I hear a run going up to the strings. So I'm using Contact. I bought a thing called Cinestrings, which is really cool for like runs. And so I added that in just to make a nice sweeping kind of run into the bridge. And now I'm going to be adding some of those woodwind sounds again to give us a lift into that bridge. I want to kind of transition properly from the verses into the bridge, so I'm just adding different little woodwind parts that I think enhance the movement going into the bridge and kind of give us a nice lift. And if you're wondering, yes, I do conduct even when I'm not shooting a video. I'm just conducting on my own because I want to see what it's like if, when I'm conducting the orchestra, what it would be like, the movement. It actually does help. I know that seems a little weird, but it does. And now I'm working on the transition to get out of the bridge, which is also important because a lot of times in this style of music, the last verse in the form will kind of die down in instrumentation, so it'll be a much more reduced instrumentation. So I already kind of have that in my mind, so I'm probably not going to have a lot going on in the beginning of this last verse, and then just maybe start to add some things to get us into the solo section. And I'm just copying and pasting the drum parts over to the second bridge. I know when the next bridge comes after the solo section that it's certainly going to have, it's got to have more momentum than the first bridge had, so I know I'm going to keep that groove. I've already laid the bass down. I'm just doing a little bit of piano now just to kind of enhance, and I'm sure I'm going to make this bridge bigger, like I said, than that first one. I had just asked Alex to send me over a little clip of him practicing, or kind of how he was hearing the melody. This way, again, it informs what I'm doing. I get to hear what he's thinking about, in his practicing, and kind of get that sound in my head. Here with Alex Hahn. Here we go. Doing a little fluting. All right. Okay, this is me being lazy and not writing out a chart for you. Let me see where you're going to play that. Normally I will write out charts for any live instruments that are coming over to play, especially woodwinds or brass, but I just didn't have time, and I know that Logic has that, as you just saw, that little kind of easy thing to read. And I knew that these woodwind parts were not very difficult, so I didn't really prioritize writing out the chart in this particular case. Again, knowing his ability, he's able to transpose. I mean, luckily the flute's not transposing, but the clarinet, I already know what I'm working with, and I knew what to expect, so I really wasn't worried about it. For those of you who are not familiar with saxophone and live instruments, most saxophone players double on flute and clarinet, or they should double on flute and clarinet, meaning that they play those two instruments in addition to the saxophone, because if they were to play like a session like this or in like a big band, a lot of times they'll be required to play flute and clarinet. So that's why he's able to do it, and he can play them well. So now that I have the flute and clarinet down, he's going to get out the horn, and I'm going to just, I usually chop off some of the ends where maybe I click the keyboard or there was a breath. I just go in and kind of edit some of those out. And I'm also going to go ahead and mute some of the synth flute and clarinet, because obviously I don't need that anymore. So I'll mute that, and I will usually hide those tracks just by, if you hit H in Logic and then click on it, you'll be able to hide that particular track. Alright, flute and clarinet down, now we're rocking the So a typical session with someone like Alex, like an instrumentalist who comes in and plays, is probably more like an hour and a half to 2 hours, as opposed to most of the time, the videos that you're watching of me working with other songwriters or pop artists. They could be anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, depending how much time we have and how much we need to get done. Yeah. This time, let's do something that's a little bit more. Feel free to. A
little more embellishments.
Yeah. Feel free to do whatever you want. And
you still want the melody straight, or like just fills, or like embellish the melody?
Yeah, I would say embellish the melody, even or shit. I don't care. I mean, I can always chop it up. Back from a little bit of a break, and I didn't eat chocolates this time, and neither did Hahn. But we're getting ready to hit the solo up, so let's do it.
Can I hear that last one?
Sure.
I just can't tell how these are sounding, to be honest.
They sound good. I think you can be a little bit more, probably a little more dramatic. We've talked about this in other videos also, that right there was one of the main jobs of a producer, to help get the best out of the artist, right? he was looking to see how I felt about it. And I wanted to get a little bit more out of him, a little bit more embellishing of the melody, basically playing a little bit more, being a little more active. Like, I like it here because it just feels like brighter, like, oh, we got the solo, we're like in the solo. So like I like the lifting. I just got it right in that great range. But again, I felt like it's like a little subdued at the end, where it's like this is your time to kind of really just do your thing. Like, I mean, you can tear that kind of shit up. I mean, you may think it's a little overdone, but we can always just cut it back if we need to.
True.
You know what I'm saying? I'd rather have some options and some things that are a little overdone, so we can be like, that's a little too much here, and then we just put another take or something. Try again. Once again, for all you aspiring producers, it's important to see that what I'm doing is trying to enhance what the artist is doing, trying to make sure that they're happy, trying to make sure that they're in a good mood, trying to help them get the best of what they are trying to do. I mean, that's our job as producers, trying to make the best recording that we can. And again, it does help to have talent, obviously, but it's also, when you're working with some of the best, it's really important that you continue to do the same things, build up their confidence, their self-esteem, so that they can give you those great takes that you're looking for, and they can make the record sound as good as possible, because you know that the talent's there. It's just sometimes, they may be like unsure of what's happening, or, they may have had a bad day or whatever, and your job is to kind of take them away from that and make sure that they give you the best result that they can that day. Boom. That was a good one. Give me one more. So in some of the new material that I've asked him to play, with more embellishments, it may be a little bit too much, and I probably will dial that back a little bit in the next stage of production, which is me kind of editing the solo and figuring out, what should go where, when to really bring it out, when to dial it back a little bit. And you can see right here, we've already started that a little bit, which is comping the solo, right? Certain parts of the solo he's going to like better than others. Same thing with me, and I'll offer suggestions. It's very easy, of course, in Logic to just swipe comp everything, so that's what we're going to do probably before he leaves. And I do this a lot with any of the artists that come in. If I'm working with an artist, most of the time I'll want them there just a little bit to see what I'm, if we're on the same page when I'm selecting things that I like. I want to make sure they like the same things too. Or I can at least offer some suggestions to them. Right now I'm just going to be putting some effects on the horn. I was thinking that I may use a vocoder to go along with the saxophone sound. I don't know how it's going to sound. I haven't used it before, but I just thought it may be kind of a cool sound. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I always like to look for new things, in the recording. Example, hip-hop beat with congas and swing feel. And now I'm thinking saxophone with vocoder. Always trying to get something that's a little bit different. And, I may or may not use the vocoder in the end. I think it's gonna be cool if I do some of that. So
I like it.
It's gonna be a little wild, but I think it could be kind of interesting.
Totally.
So I started doing a little bit of a mix on this earlier today, and what I'm doing now is, now that I have kind of got a balanced mix, I'm just pulling the levels up to about -6, -7, because I'm getting ready to actually fully mix and to start doing automation moves. So what you're seeing here is, you can see it's kind of zoomed in on the mixing console. I'm highlighting all the tracks and then just pulling them up, because I want the output level to be, like I said, roughly about -7, -6, because that's a good place for me to really be in the end, because you need enough what's called headroom for the mastering stage. Over here, I'm starting to make fader moves with individual tracks. So, for example, over here it looks like an oboe has a line that I want to come out. So what I'm doing is I'm moving it to touch mode, which means anything I touch on that track will write automation. So I hit the touch mode, and then I just move the fader up and down, and it will write that automation for me. So what I'm doing is just it's called riding the fader, and I'm riding it up just a little bit to bring that part out, and then once I release it, it goes back to the original place where I had the fader. One of the things that's important about this is you should really save these fader moves to literally the last stage of your mixing, because once you start putting automation moves, you can't just drag a fader up and down because automation's already been written. So you'd have to go into the automation window, and it becomes a whole thing. So you really want to save your rides till the end of the mixing process. One of the great things about working with Alex is he's very focused and he's easy to work with. I wish I could stress that more, but it's so much easier to work with people that are easy to work with and are open to trying new things. Like, not every saxophone player would be open to trying a vocoder on their saxophone sound. So, I always like to do that and try to find unique ways of attacking a project. It looks like we're about out of time. Thanks so much for watching us. If you'd like, feel free to hit us down in the comments. And if you'd like to download this song, you can hit the info box below and you'll be able to download it for free. Peace. Spicy cheese.